where I think Netanyahu deserves enormous credit is taking this, this natural resource, if you will, Israeli human capital. Like it's tech to Israel is like what oil is to Saudi Arabia, right? He's taken the tech boom in Israel and used it for geopolitical leverage. And that has been, I believe, his genius. And I think so much, even before you get to the Gulf, so much of these openings around the world have been diplomatic breakthroughs, have been a result of Netanyahu. I mean, look at India now. We take it for granted that India and Israel are locked arms. Now, 30 years ago, I think, the Indian government was like part of one of the campaign managers of the orchestra, one of the symphony conductors of the non-aligned movement in the UN General Assembly, organizing all these anti-Israel votes in the UN General Assembly. India had terrible, toxic relations with Israel. 2017, Netanyahu travels to India, brings a delegation of business leaders from Israel, economic experts, tech gurus, and he figured out India has a huge water problem and they have huge agricultural problems. And he'd used the tech community in Israel, particularly in drip irrigation and a couple of other areas, to set up all these centers of excellence around India. And he basically calculated that if we can help these farmers in India increase their yields by like 5 or 6 times, you could have a second agricultural revolution in the subcontinent. And this delegation led by Netanyahu went to India, and I spoke to someone, they said they couldn't believe it. Modi was taking them around to these villages, and like tens of thousands of Indian farmers were showing up to greet them like they were the Beatles. And so Netanyahu, and then less than a year and a half later, Netanyahu had Modi come to Israel. And so they have this, the stuff they're doing, the co-innovation that India and Israel are doing is quite something. And I can go like literally continent by continent. He's been doing this in Europe. He's been doing it all throughout Latin America. He's been doing it in Africa. He visits, like there was a period about a year and a half ago where he was visiting a different African country like every other month. It was the first time they'd ever received an Israeli leader. What do they want from Israel? They want this. They want access to this tech ecosystem. And I think he's been very savvy about how to take this tech ecosystem and, use it to produce diplomatic relationships and diplomatic breakthroughs. And, it has a self-fulfilling, it becomes circuitous because as these diplomatic breakthroughs happen, it makes it easier for these countries to do business with Israel. And so that further fuels the tech economy in Israel. One stat that just blew me away. It's just in the news this week. So when we wrote Startup Nation, the big whopping number was that Israel attracted about $2 to $2.5 billion in global venture capital. So basically all this innovation capital is swashing around the world. Israel's attracting a couple billion of it, which on a per capita basis was the highest in the world, higher than the U.S. There were just numbers out now that Bloomberg reported earlier this week. Israel's is on track to this year attract $10 billion in global venture capital. I mean, 4 or 5x what they were doing a decade ago. That all happened under Netanyahu.
Right.
It also happened because the sectors that Israel's playing in are really matter a lot to where the global economy is going, especially during COVID, actually, but especially because of the changes during COVID. So there's a lot of money, but he deserves credit for really opening up a lot of these relationships that I think make it easier for investors from around the world to feel comfortable and not feel any political stigma with investing in Israel because their own governments are welcoming Netanyahu with open arms.